Welcome. Grab your favorite morning beverage and join us for Morning Canolis with James Santelle.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother.
Sampling the news desserts of the week, here is your host, James Santelle.
Good morning. This is James Santelle, and yes, I am your host for this hour and next hour here on the broadcast stations of Civic Media. Delighted to be with you this morning. Delighted that you are with me on what is going to turn out to be a special edition of our Saturday morning broadcast. I will tell you all about that in just a few moments. As always, this is our weekly review, our analysis, our description of the major events, those significant things happening in our lives, locally, in the state, in the nation, and yes, this morning also in the world, that affect what? That affect government and law and the aspiration for justice that we all have, including right here in our state and in our nation. As always, we have an ambitious but achievable agenda, again, added on to today with something very special that we've never done before. Very excited about that, to tell you about that in just a few moments. As always, our questions are focused on three principal things, and that is what happened. What do we know about the recent news events of our lives? Why are they important? Why are they significant? That's our second major question. And third, what should we do about them? If there are things that we should react to, respond to, what should we be thinking about in terms of making our own decisions about the things that have happened, understanding why they're significant material in our lives, and the things that we should do in response to those? We're going to be asking and answering all of those questions for you this morning in this first hour and our next hour as well. I am delighted to be with you and also to be with my wonderful producer, Calvin, right here in the Civic Media Studios here in downtown beautiful Waukesha. But we are broadcasting again throughout stations throughout the state of Wisconsin. And yes, indeed, here's your teaser. We're actually going to be involving some of my colleagues here in the Civic Media Network coming from Cable, Wisconsin. Yes, indeed, we're going to be doing some cut-ins, some information, some conversation about the all-important Birkebeiner cross-country ski race. It is the largest cross-country ski race in North America, and we're going to be talking about it live to you as it's going on this morning. This has been a part of the Civic Media presentation throughout this past week. I've got some great friends and guests who are going to be joining me on 4 occasions in the next couple of hours. Greg and Gray, I'll introduce them shortly, are going to be talking with me and talking with all of us about the things that they are perceiving, the things that they're experiencing there in Cable and Hayward, this all-important sporting event. Affected this year by the weather, but not at all dampened in spirit and enthusiasm. We're going to be talking all about the Birkebeiner, and yes, indeed, there is a connection, a strong connection, which we'll get to in just a few moments, between their work there in Hayward and Cable, the involvement of all of these sports enthusiasts, these cross-country skiers, and rule of law issues, government, and the commitment that all of us should make to good government. The focus, a lot of focus this morning, on the involvement of human beings and making certain that government remains viable, and the significance of being out there to be responsible for government. We're going to talk about some history that leads up to the Birkebeiner here in Wisconsin that goes back 825 years. Some rule of law history, some rule of law perspective that's also going to animate our discussions with my friends Gray and Greg in just a few moments. Before we get to that, let me tell you about the other things that are going to be on our important achievable syllabus this morning. We are necessarily going to be talking once again about Supreme Court-related issues, and that has to do with things like firearms. Just yesterday, we know that the head of the NRA and the NRA itself was on the receiving end of a major jury verdict, and we're going to talk about that, the significance of that, inside our larger discussion about firearms, and indeed we're going to go back and talk a little bit about this Michigan case against the mother and ultimately the father as well of a young man who's already pled guilty to an horrific shooting there in Michigan. We're going to talk about the consequences of that inside our larger discussion about firearms in America. We're also, of course, going to talk about this other major issue having to do with the embryos and whether or not embryos are human beings. This decision by the Alabama Supreme Court that I suspect all of you have heard about. We're going to parse that, describe that, and talk there again about the consequences of that major decision having to do with privacy rights and reproductive rights, the connection between what the Alabama Supreme Court has done and the things that are out there generally in our world. And then we're going to also chat about academics. All these things things somewhat related to the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about a decision made by Yale University just this past week having to do with admissions. We're going to go back and figure out what has happened in the wake of the June decision of last year by our United States Supreme Court having to do with the decision about prohibiting schools from addressing race as one of the considerations when it comes to admissions. So we've got issues on firearms, on embryos and reproductive life and reproductive issues, academics. We're going to do some updates as well about these major cases involving Donald Trump, the judgment entered against him just yesterday by the New York court, the decision that's still pending in front of the Supreme Court having to do with his immunity defense in the federal case. We're also going to go back and talk about something we haven't talked about in a while, and that is that Florida case involving Mar-a-Lago, the documents case. What is Judge Eileen Cannon doing there? What are the recent events, and what can we anticipate this coming week and a hearing that she's got scheduled on next best steps there? And finally, in the category generally of our focus this week on things related to timing and on the world in which we live, we're going to talk more about some of the international issues, including things going on in places like Brazil and Pakistan and Germany. All of those also have lessons for us here in America, reverberating also for us here in America when it comes to our own politics, our own government, and our own aspiration for justice. All of that on our agenda, our syllabus this morning, including again, just right after our first break, we're going to be talking with my friends Gray and Greg about the Birkebeiner cross-country ski race. So let me do some history, some rule of law history as a predicate for that discussion coming up in just about 5 or 6 minutes or so. Has to do with a young man named Prince Haakon, Haakon. He was born in the village of Falkenberg in Norway, and probably in the summer of 1204, maybe spring or so of that year. His father was a king. His name was Haakon Severson. And Inga had been with Haakon at the time of the birth of young Haakon. So what happens is that Haakon Severson was the leader of something called the Birkebeiner faction. The Birkebeiner faction in an ongoing civil war with a competing group called the Baglers, B-A-G-L-E-R. And Haakon, the king, was dead by the time his son, young Haakon, was born. And his mother's claim, Inga's claim, was supported by several of Haakon Severson's followers. She was again the remaining matriarch of the family. He was born, young Haakon, into the Bagler-controlled territory in that area, and his mother's claim, his mother's position, placed young Haakon at the time in a very serious, a perilous position for his life. And the Baglers, that is again the competing group there in the early part of the 13th century, started hunting for young Haakon. A group of the Birkebeiners, again interested in protecting their government, their basis for their livelihood there, found the young child in the winter of 1205-1206, and they picked him up to keep him from getting abducted and arguably even killed by the Baglers, the competing faction there, and they headed for a king, Inga Bardsson. He was the new Birkebeiner king in that area, and the party that took him, especially 2 skiers in particular, are bringing young Haakon across the land. They're stricken by a blizzard. And 2 of those very best skiers carried on with the young child over the mountains, and they eventually arrive at the location of the king. They bring young Haakon to safety with King Inga, and that event is commemorated even in modern-day Norway by this popular skiing event known there as the Birkebeiner Rennet. The Birkebeiner Rennet. That dramatic childhood incident, that is being young, being the target of an attempted abduction, arguably even attempted homicide by the competing faction, and the decision by these very brave Birkebeiners to take the young boy and bring him through the winter on their cross-country skis, posing some great danger to themselves. All of that gives rise not only to this great event that did happen in Norway, and again in 1205, 1206, the winter of that year. All of that gives rise not only to that great story here, but also to this rule of law notion that exists in Norway to this day. That is the importance of understanding what your government is all about. Again, even there, at the time, obviously they have got a monarchy, as do many other countries in Europe at that time, even to this day. But they recognized the importance of a legitimate government, and they recognized the significance of not engaging in violence to upset or in any way to countermand or undermine that governmental authority. Issues that reverberate even to us to this day in this nation when we think about the future of our nation. We don't have a monarchy. We all know that. 240 years we have thrown that off from the king in England. But one of the continuing messages of today's discussion on law and government, the aspiration for justice, is going to be all about this focus upon what people themselves do to preserve the government, at least the trappings of government, so that we've got those rights that we do have here in America, other places, things like freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of faith expression, all those kinds of things. That's what, in many ways, this story about young King Haakon is all about. And yes, indeed, it always is going to be important, as we understand right here in Wisconsin, that event in Norway prompted the creation of our own Birkebeiner, which again is this ski race, this cross-country ski race. It is the largest cross-country ski race in North America, right here in Wisconsin. Cable, Hayward, that part of our world. About 5.5, almost 6 hours from where I'm broadcasting. Calvin and I are this morning. We're going to be joining right after this break by folks who are up there. Again, my colleagues, Gray Gunderson and Greg Griesel, are going to be joining me to talk about what they're witnessing, what they've been involved in this past week in the Wisconsin Birkebeiner, the National Birkebeiner, this important place in our state, this great sporting event that also I would offer to you this morning in the context of our own Saturday morning broadcast is, even in its sporting elaborateness, even in its exaltation of sporting and the great things going on right there, is also an affirmation of the rule of law and of justice and of things that government can and should do to make the country, make the locality, make the state better. All of those issues packed into our discussion coming up here on our Saturday morning broadcast. Right after this break, going to be going to Cable and talking about the Birkebeiner and my good friends, Gray and Greg. Stay with me for that important discussion right here on our Saturday morning broadcast. Stay with us and join us as well. Back, and my name is James Santelle. I'm your host this hour and next hour. Right now, a very special feature on our Saturday morning broadcast. Delighted to have you participating with Calvin and me and my good friends, Gray Gunderson and Greg Griesel. Both of them, Greg and Gray, are right now in Cable, Wisconsin, and they're participating. They're going to be talking with us right now about the Birkebeiner cross-country ski race. Greg and Gray, glad to have you with me this morning on our Saturday morning broadcast.
Happy to be here, Jim. Thank you so much for letting us broadcast in on behalf of WBZH here out of Hayward, our civic media station in Hayward. Of course, Big G and I are in Cable, and if you don't mind, we'd like to just immediately thank our sponsors, Cut In Possible, today.
Please do just that. That's important.
I echo that, Jim. Thank you very much for letting us come on your show today.
The first couple sponsors we'd like to thank are actually located right in Hayward. They would be River and Rain Wellness Boutique and Advanced Printing of Hayward, and Big G's got a couple as well.
Yeah, I want to thank the Lakewood Cafe on Railroad Street. Great burgers and delicious pie, and also thank Lakeside Property Service of Park Falls, Wisconsin, for helping us do this broadcast this afternoon from our broadcasting here at WBZH Radio, the Buzz of the North, and our network of civic media stations.
And an extra special thank you to the Cable Natural History Museum for the American Birkebeiner. The number of people compared to the cell signal available in a town of this size, I'm afraid we were forced into a Wi-Fi territory instead.
And that's a good thing, Gray, because you know what? We can hear you just fine. And listeners can do just the same. Just great. So the two of you have been up there all week, yes?
Well, we actually were here. We started, our presence here began mostly yesterday. There has been a civic media presence in the area all week, beginning with Todd Albaugh, who has been doing his live show from the WBZH offices in Hayward for most or all of this week. And he was able to take in, well as some of our other colleagues. Catherine Lake was able to take in some Berkey as well. We primarily have been witnessing it firsthand as of yesterday, and we'll be seeing a little bit more of it today. Today kind of being the main event, or the main day of events among the 5 days that the Berkey covers.
Yeah, it's an incredible atmosphere up there, Jim. When you go up there, it's like Mother Nature didn't cooperate with us this year as far as snow conditions. And, you drive up here, you see brown grass and in the woods and stuff, and you drive through the woods, and all of a sudden there's this winter wonderland with all these cross-country skiers, the colors, big entertainment tent there, great stage there. And
just out of nowhere, it's quite incongruous. The drive compared to the destination, it's amazing the discrepancy you see.
And
hats off to everybody that helped pull this thing off this year.
Absolutely. And so tell us about that. So we've got manufactured snow, and it looks spectacular. You mentioned before it looks like almost like a Disney movie. How did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, actually, the decision on what the Berkey would be, and frankly, whether there would be a Berkey this year, given the Wisconsin weather that we've had, was not finalized until the 12th of February, just under 2 weeks ago. And so the decision having been made at that time only allowed so much time for preparation between decision and race day. And long story snow since January, and the amount of snow that has been manufactured by far supersedes the amount that has fallen naturally. So I would estimate a maximum natural snow content of 5% in what is being used as the track, which is over 6 miles of 1 foot to 3 foot thick track. Again, these are my estimates, but the amount of snow hauled, placed, groomed repeatedly is quite astounding. The human effort involved is a sight to behold all its own when you get to the track
it's
here.
Incredible the way they got it set up, and they got it graded so nice, and the way they're able to keep the snow is amazing. Just incredible.
And I'm going to guess that effort also produced lots of human beings that are participating in the ski race. Tell me about that. Tell us all about the human beings who are there, the population, the show up for this major event.
Yeah, everybody is so excited. I mean, they got the cowbells going and everything going over there, and the colors, and the skiers really have some colorful outfits, and just walking around there just walking and talking to some people there, and like I said, there's skiers from all over the world here. I mean, you're talking from all over the country here. We're talking like from
I think I
France,
saw a winner from Florida
Germany,
yesterday. Yep.
Norway, UK.
All around the
countries
world
are represented. Switzerland, Sweden.
Yeah, if you look at the leaderboards for any given event, there's a pretty solid chance that there's a Scandinavian at the top or somebody from Clam Lake just a couple miles away from here. So it's a fantastic international effort to cooperation in the participation, as well as the local effort making it possible was nothing short of astonishing. It's quite evident. You walk up to this improvised 10-kilometer loop track with what is essentially a concert space in the middle that they call the celebration area, so that you can be right up close to all of the action during all of the events. They're going right by you. You can't, I mean, you're not encouraged to reach out and touch the skiers as they go by, but if a person were so
Absolutely.
And these events are for all ages. So.
And young people and older people as well. Before we break in this first segment, and you guys are going to come back later in the hour too, right? You make that commitment to me this morning, yes, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the second hour as well.
So.
Tell me about what's going on today. What is the schedule today for what you're going to be seeing up there in Cable and Hayward?
Saturday is really the main event day. It includes some of the more popular or famous Berkey events. So today there's going to be the 30K American Berkey Skate. There will also be the Super Tour Men and Women's American Birkebeiner. And then there's an event known as the Spirit of 35. Some of these events actually had an alternate day on Thursday, so we'll really find out today what the actual podium is going to look like. And then one special note, the USA Women's 2018 cross-country Olympic team, the first U.S. team to ever gain the gold medal in cross-country, behalf of that team, Jesse Diggins will be participating in the events today at the Cable Telemark Village as a normal old participant in the Birkebeiner like anybody else.
Terrific. Fantastic. Say, gentlemen, thank you so much for this. All started way back in 1205, 1206 with the original Birkebeiner events, as we described them, those rule of law events way back in Norway, alive today in Wisconsin, alive today with you. You guys are going to join me again at the end of this hour, again, the second hour as well, a couple of times. So we'll be back in touch with you. Thank you so much this morning for this information, this insight into what's going on there. We'll be back in touch with the two of you very, very shortly. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Gray.
Thank you, Jim.
Wonderful. And so in connection with this international notion that we have this morning, this idea that we are all connected, as I said, at the end of our second hour, we're going to be spending some time talking about other places in the world in which rule of law issues have been important, including places like Brazil and Pakistan, even Germany. We're going to begin this morning our rule of law exposition, our review, with things happening just yesterday in our own world right here in America. It has to do with guns. Regrettably, once again, that issue in America, a continuing challenge for legislators, for executors, and for all of us when it comes to keeping us safe and secure. The two issues we're going to talk about this morning, the two events this morning related to firearms. We know that the Supreme Court this coming week is going to be addressing another issue about whether or not bump stocks, these devices that turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon, whether those should be subject to regulation by the ATF. That's coming up before our United States Supreme Court this coming week, oral argument on that. And we also know that just yesterday, something significant happened with a major gun rights organization. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happened yesterday in a Manhattan jury courtroom. Stay with us for that all-important discussion.
Talking about a world where all is free. It just couldn't be, and only a fool would say that. Only a fool would say.
Welcome back to our continuing discussion this morning. It is Saturday, February 24th, 2024, talking about all things law, government, and the aspiration for justice in America. Significant news yesterday coming out of a New York courtroom having to do with the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and its embattled leader, Wayne LaPierre. Where does this come from? What is the genesis for what happened just yesterday? A major case, a jury verdict that's going to affect dramatically this major gun rights organization, certainly its leadership as well. We know well that this particular lawsuit was brought way back in 2020, about almost 4 years ago, and initiated by the Attorney General of the state of New York. Her name is Letitia James. You've heard her before. Yes, this is the same government official, the same civil prosecutor in the state of New York responsible for enforcing New York state law, who's also brought the most recent case involving Donald Trump, his sons, and that organization. In that case involving valuations, we know that just yesterday, the judge in that case, Judge Ngoran, entered the final judgment. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. This is the same prosecutor, the same civil litigator who brought this lawsuit apart from the case against the Trump organization and Donald Trump, this one against the NRA. She charged that as a nonprofit group in New York since 1871, responsible for following the rules and regulations of incorporation and of status there in the state of New York, identifying in the initial civil complaint a great number of financial troubles, internal conflicts that all had led to a years-long pattern of financial misconduct and even corruption. Even corruption is what she has alleged during the course of this trial, a weeks-long trial that just concluded yesterday. A jury, not a judge. In the other case, Judge Engoron deciding the case. In this case, a jury, after a week of deliberations, found the group's former leader, Wayne LaPierre, you have heard of him in the past, had in fact used NRA funds as a part of the nonprofit group itself to do what? To pay for some personal expenses, including things like vacations and luxury flights for his relatives, rides on super yachts. Jurors found that Wayne LaPierre and others involved with him had misspent about $5.4 million, $5.4 million in organization funds. He's repaid some of that, as he said, during the course of the trial, but still is on the line for about $4.35 million. Now, in addition to Wayne LaPierre, the leader, by the way, he resigned right before the start of this trial. He's no longer in that position of responsibility, prompting the course of the trial for the NRA lawyers, the lawyers for the company, for the association, to distance himself from Mr. LaPierre. They were arguing that while LaPierre, had done some good things for the organization, we talked a lot about Second Amendment issues here on this broadcast, his identity and his extravagances, which I just described, including, among other things, some Beverly Hills shopping sprees, was not a part of the mission, the purpose of the NRA, not synonymous with the group's mission and direction and focus. The lawyer for the group said the NRA is not Wayne LaPierre. So right inside the trial itself, or the period of the last couple of weeks, a division, if you will. This is not a consolidated defense against the claims brought by the Attorney General. This is a division among them, and sure enough, during the course of the trial, that became clear. Beyond Wayne LaPierre in this major case, having been found responsible for his misspending, his negligence, his purposeful misconduct, and even his corruption, defendants also included the former treasurer, his name is Wilson Phillips, and general counsel, his name is John Frazier. They both also found by the jury to have failed in their duties to the organization. Phillips, among other things, required to pay about $2 million. All of this coming out of the case just yesterday, presented by Attorney General Letitia James. A great deal of very specific information about the misuses of these funds, including things like the use of helicopters to avoid traffic during trips to NASCAR races, showing that LaPierre sought reimbursement for mosquito treatments, landscaping at his own house, all sorts of things like that during the course of the trial. Why is this significant? Well, it plainly signals not only the work and the function of an attorney general responsible for enforcing state law. That's what we've talked about a lot on this broadcast in this and at least that other case involving Donald Trump, but also disclosed and revealed in this very public forum. Yes, that's right. It's a public trial. The corruption, the fraud, the misconduct that has been a part of this association in recent years. An awful lot of people look at this and other difficulties inside that organization as the beginning of the end, if not the middle of the eventual demise of the NRA. It still continues to be an entity that begins to be the subject of a lot of discussion along the way. As the courtroom responded to all of this, of course, the NRA going to have to be responsible for not only responding to the jury verdict, but also individuals responsible for paying back the millions of dollars misspent during the course of this conduct by them for years and years and years. The senior vice president for law and policy of a group called Everytown for Gun Safety said, we're 2 months into 2024, and the NRA has already managed to lose this trial, their longtime leader, and whatever political relevance it had left. The verdict confirms what we've seen in recent elections, in state legislatures, and in halls of Congress. The gun lobby, he said, has never been weaker. And indeed, to the extent that we have major issues with respect to guns in America, misuse, abuse of firearms, the NRA's lobbying in Congress presumably has had a huge impact upon the failure of our federal legislature, state legislatures as well, to pass laws to impact and address our gun problem in America. We know as well that as much as that civil case going on and concluding just yesterday in that Manhattan courtroom, we know that earlier in this month, in February, there was another case. This is a criminal case pending in a Michigan courtroom. And during the course of this past month, Michigan jurors there in a criminal case, about 11 hours of deliberation in a criminal case against a woman named Jennifer Crumbley, Crumbley, found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for the gun rampage, the horrific event committed by her teenage son, who carried out, yes, that's right, the state's deadliest shooting more than 2 years ago. The trial, unmistakably, since the time of its prosecution there by Michigan prosecutors, and certainly since the time of the return of this verdict, convicting her on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for each student her son killed in what, once again, is Michigan's deadliest school shooting ever. Plainly, this is sort of a lightning rod for issues about parental responsibility in a time when these cases, all too frequent in our nation, are involving guns and being carried out by minors. It was perhaps the most high-profile example of prosecutors seeking to hold parents responsible for violent crimes committed by their children. There have been others. Other charges of reckless conduct or neglect, kind of a larger push to identify accountability inside these parents when they're suspected of enabling deadly violence by their children. But the charges against Ms. Crumbly, in particular, were more serious, and that's why this test case is so very important. Along the way, during the course of the trial, a lot of aggravating factors that make this simply not a case involving indifference or turning one's back to what your son or daughter is doing, mostly sons in the history of our recent mass shootings by young people. In the course of closing argument during the course of this case, the prosecutor emphasized the severity of these charges and reflecting on the negligence, the horrific crime that resulted from that incapacity, that decision made by the parents to not do anything when confronted with lots and lots of indications. Ethan, the son, has already pled guilty to 24 charges, including first-degree murder. He was sentenced last year already. He is going to be spending the rest of his life in imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Did not testify in his mother's trial. The father, James Crumbly, he is going to be tried separately in March, so his trial is still coming up. But along the way, we know that in this trial of mother of Jennifer Crumbly herself, lots of indications that this was a not unique, but a case where an awful lot of facts indicated they should have gotten not only signals about what their son was doing, his crisis situation, but also their capacity to respond to it. The prosecutors plainly presented a lot of evidence that Ms. Crumbly should have noticed that her son's distress was significant, should have stopped him from committing this act of, frankly, just unspeakable violence there. Said that the prosecutors along the way said that she and her husband didn't do any one of a number of tragically small and easy things that they could have done to prevent all this from happening. They focused in part upon Ethan's access to a firearm, but jurors also had to wrestle with a lot of other information. They were shown messages that Ethan sent to a friend in April of 2021 complaining of insomnia, some messages to this friend, paranoia, hearing voices. They were also shown messages that, as the jurors were, that he sent to his mother in March of 21, in which he suggested that their home was haunted by a demon. And his mother, prosecutors pointed out during the course of the trial, didn't always respond to that. Now, in her testimony, Crumbly herself said that Ethan's parents had joked for years about the house being haunted, but there was even more beyond that. The government also showed messages exchanged between Crumbly and her husband, some colleagues, some friends also along the way, suggested that Ms. Crumbly had paid more attention to their 2 horses and an extramarital affair than her son's needs and the attention that necessarily he should have been getting at the time. Significantly, there was a meeting between Crumbly and school officials that took place about 2 hours, just 2 hours before the attack. Crumbly and her husband had been called to the high school after Ethan wrote troubling things on a math worksheet, including the phrase, blood everywhere. Crumbly said that after a counselor shared concerns about that event, those communications, they decided that her son could stay at school that day. They did not search his backpack, which of course contained the pistol that he would eventually use to effectuate this horrific mass shooting on his schoolmates. Beyond that, the young man, Ethan here, had written about a plan to cause bloodshed. He had drawings of guns, pleas for help regarding his mental health. All of that a part of the trial. And why do I mention that? That's all grisly. It's all very, very graphic, because it does underscore the strength of this particular prosecution. An awful lot of people saying things like, well, gee, does this open up responsibility, liability in a criminal setting, maybe even a civil setting for other parents? And the answer is that yes, it does indeed identify circumstances under which a juror will find parents responsible. But I would offer that it does not open up the exposure of parents if indeed there are some less significant events than the ones presented in this particular trial. This is compelling evidence of parents who had an awful lot of information, a lot of an indication that their son Ethan was not only in trouble, but planned to do exactly what he did. And yes, indeed, the jurors in this case found that the parents will be held responsible under these circumstances. More difficult cases will be situations where you don't have this compelling, huge nature of information out there, huge information to support these 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Guns in America, a lot of information, a lot of things going on in our courts. The civil conviction, if you will, of the NRA and its chief, Wayne LaPierre, just yesterday. This matter in Michigan, and we know once again that this coming week, on the 26th, the Supreme Court is going to be determining whether or not bump stocks in America should be regulated under federal law by the ATF. Bump stocks, once again, these mechanisms that turn semi-automatic weapons into machine guns, which are indeed in violation, are illegal under federal law. A huge amount out there having to do with firearms in America just this past week, just this past month. We will see if indeed all of this prompts our legislature, as we have talked in the past, to do things, to remedy these things in a way that we know will be effective. When we come back, we're going to talk more about other cases in our courts in America. Stay with us for that all-important discussion.
When I wanted you to share my life, I had no doubt in my mind. And it's been you, woman, right down the line.
We are back in this, our final segment of our first hour here on Saturday morning, February 24th, 2024. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining my producer, Calvin, who's right with me here in the studios of Civic Media here in downtown Waukesha. We are once again, as promised, going to be bringing into our discussion my 2 good friends and colleagues, Greg and Gray, who are right now in Cable, Wisconsin. They're at the Birkebeiner cross-country ski race, the single largest cross-country ski race in North America, talking with us in the next few moments here about what they're seeing, what they're experiencing there. And also, once again, as I said at the first time that we chatted with them this morning, bringing together this notion that sports are a part of our lives. And this particular one, having to do with the Birkebeiner, the name of that coming out of some significant rule of law events, some government events, way back in 1205, 1206 in Norway. But in 2024, delighted that my friends Greg and Gray are with me once again to join me in this segment to talk more about what they're seeing on the ground right there in Cable, also in Hayward. Many, many people gathered together for this major sporting event that celebrates life and the good things that America and the state of Wisconsin is all about. Greg, glad to have you with me once again.
Hey, Mike, thank you. Thank you for letting us come on your show today. Big G here with Gray here, and we're up in Cable, Wisconsin. Thanks to the Cable Natural History Museum for providing us this broadcast venue this afternoon, and we're representing WBZH Radio, the Buzz of the North, up here in Hayward. Thanks again, Jim. I really appreciate letting us be on the show today. And, man, boy, this event here, it attracts people worldwide. And I know you were talking about how the event and the history of the event and everything. So yeah, there's just, we were over to the trailhead yesterday at the Mount Telmark area over there, and right here. Man, just all sorts of things going on. They got a great setup over there. Really a streamlined event this year, too. If you take Highway 63, I mean, they're busing everybody in. They've really got it well organized. And, Mother Nature, and where you're at, Jim, are you down in Waukesha or Madison, or where are you at?
That's exactly right. We are right here in Waukesha. Overcast, but no snow today. I guess no snow up there either. But that highway between Cable and Hayward in North northwestern Wisconsin. Just beautiful area up there. Passable, plainly, right, Greg? And also
You betcha.
the support for this
Beautiful
wonderful
and,
sporting event. Yeah.
And there is snow. I mean, it's amazing that you can be driving and then all of a sudden going by the trailhead there, and they got a beautiful track. It's 1 to 3 feet of manufactured snow. Amazing.
And the temperature there, Greg, today for this wonderful event is. I'll turn you into a weatherman for a moment here.
Actually, right around in the 30 degree mark,
Perfect.
low 30s today, so it's pretty decent condition.
Right.
To melt the sno today, the participants will be comfortable.
Very good.
Yep. Yesterday
very good.
it was in the 20s, so but I mean the week has been 40s and mid 40s. So I mean, hats off to the people that manufactured the snow and able to keep the snow conditions over there. So.
And Greg, you know, I know we've got these major events going on today, and we're going to have you back again if you stay with me next hour for a couple more discussions. Talk with me a little bit about the children, also youth involved in some of the activities this past week. This is a sport for the entire family, and certainly that's true of the Birkebeiner there in northwestern Wisconsin there as well.
That's exactly right, Jim. They have events for the youth, any under 18. They've got an event called the Barney Birkie.
Yeah, the Barney Birkie is traditionally has been a youth shortened circuit. This year they had to do it as a fun run event, but there's actually even under 10 waves that depart as part of the. There's junior Birkies that are still ski events this year. All of them for 10 and under, and there's some pretty impressive skiers that can claim the age of 8 and 9 years old. I'm kind of blown away.
Yeah, I don't think the track or the conditions are any different than if we had a regular snowfall. Everybody was really, I think, pretty satisfied with the track conditions and everything out there. So, worldwide event, like you say, attracts people from all over the world.
That's great. And part of the celebration, as I understand it, it's also, I think you mentioned this before, Greg, the costuming, and also we've got some canine involvement. Is that right? There's some dogs there as well, also a huge part of the celebration.
Yeah, I'll actually be weighing in at the beginning of the next hour here to talk about some of the crazy Thursday, but one of those is traditionally a ski jor event. Of course, for those not familiar with ski jor, that refers to a single cross-country skier attached to a single dog in kind of a cross between cross-country skiing and sled dog racing. That this year has turned into just a fun run event with your dog. But yeah, that would be the a canacross this year, canine cross event, as opposed to the normal ski jor event it would have been in years past.
So is that the Birkebeiner then?
That would be the Birkebeiner, exactly.
So.
Perfect. And again, reference to history, but also an affirmation of the great involvement of our pets as well in this terrific event going on right now in the area. That sounds just great. Well, you two guys, you'll stay with me again for next hour. I'd like to get back to you a couple of times next hour as well. Chat more about some of the local color there, the celebration, and this important event, again, not only in our history, but in world history as well. Will you come back again next hour and chat with me more about all this?
Absolutely,
we'll be back
Jim.
with you, Jim. Thanks again for having us on your show, and thank you to our sponsors, Lakewood Cafe and Hayward on Railroad Street. We've got the Lakeside Property Service of Park Falls, Wisconsin, Advanced Printing in Hayward, Wisconsin, and River and Rains Wilderness Boutique in Hayward, Wisconsin. So let's bring the broadcast together.
And another special thank you to the Cable Natural History Museum for hosting this media space for us to broadcast from today.
All good people, all good entities, and all supporting what we're doing here on the Civic Media radio stations and what you're broadcasting all about there from Cable and Hayward in this wonderful part of our state. Thanks so much, gentlemen. We'll be back in touch again very soon.
Thank you, Jim.
Wonderful. Good. So, as a part of our discussion every single Saturday morning, we also solicit calls. And that number, of course, is 844-967-2789, 844-967-2789. We've got just a minute or so, but we do have a caller already on the line, perhaps responding to some of our rule of law related information this morning. I'm going to take the call from Rico. Rico, if you don't have a complete chance to discuss with you your issue, we'll do it at the top of the second hour. But Rico, glad to have you with me this morning on our broadcast.
Am I on?
You are on, Rico. Absolutely. Glad to have you with me. Go right ahead.
Do you want me to ask my question now, or should I wait till after the top?
We've got about a minute or so, Calvin's telling me. So why don't you pose your question now, and I can ponder it then over the top of the hour. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll get to it quickly, Jim, because it does fall in line with what you were talking about earlier. But I want to go to an earlier case that took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, over here, in particular the Rittenhouse case.
Yes.
And what has baffled me, Jim, about this, maybe you could help me understand. I've often wondered, how did the Judge Schroeder, I believe, and I believe it was Mark Richards was Kyle's attorney, how did they beat that under 18 possession of a firearm for someone that was underneath 18 years old? Because he was 17 years old, and I've often wondered this, Jim.
Sure. And you know what? Great question, Rico. You know what? I am going to take that up, and we're going to talk a bit more about the Kyle Rittenhouse matter when we come back at the top of the next hour. Rico, thank you for your question this morning. We'll chat about that at the top of our next hour.
Welcome. Grab your favorite morning beverage and join us for Morning Canolis with Jim Santelle.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother.
Sampling the news desserts of the week, here is your host, Jim Santelle.
Welcome to this, our second hour of our Saturday morning broadcast, Saturday, February 24th, 2024. My name is Jim Santelle, and along with my wonderful producer, Calvin, I'm here in the studios of WAUK in downtown Waukesha. Also taking your phone calls this morning at 844-967-2789. Delighted to have you with me again this morning as we talk about great numbers of things having to do with America and the aspiration for justice that all of us had here in the state of Wisconsin, throughout our nation, and indeed throughout our world. Right before the break, we took a good phone call from Rico. Rico calling in connection with our discussion this morning about firearms, specifically this finding earlier this month that Jennifer Crumbley, the mother of Ethan Crumbley, who has already pled guilty to 24 counts of first-degree murder in this horrific event in Michigan, found guilty herself for involuntary manslaughter, 4 counts, one for each student that her son killed in Michigan's deadly school shooting. Also talking yesterday about this verdict coming out of New York, finding that the NRA and indeed Wayne LaPierre, its former leader, responsible for a huge amount of misconduct and corruption, specifically in the area of financial integrity and the lack of it. Rico asking about Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse, this case that we all recall well here in Wisconsin and throughout our nation. Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, all this stemming from his killing 2 men and wounding another with an assault weapon during the civil unrest that happened in Kenosha following that 2020 police shooting of Jacob Blake. Lots of things to discuss here, lots of things to unpack here related to the possession of the weapon, the acquisition of it, where his parents were, those kinds of things. But along the way, Rico asking how it is that Rittenhouse, at the time a juvenile, not at 18 years old, 17, was responsible for responding to the charges against him in an adult court. And indeed, his lawyer, during the course of the closing argument, said, my client was 17 years old. His actions should be charged and should be judged as a 17-year-old. Well, the narrow answer, although not the complete answer, certainly is that Wisconsin is one of about 3 states, including Georgia, Texas, perhaps others out there, where the law does require that the justice system, our court system, treat 17-year-olds as adults. And a lot of disagreement about that, lots of legislation introduced to increase that again to the 18. Obviously, we know that many things attend to one when you achieve that age of 18. This is not one of them. And so Kyle Rittenhouse charged and brought into the adult court facing those charges there in Kenosha. Lots of other issues, obviously, related to Kyle Rittenhouse that we will not be addressing this morning, but can, in fact, review down the road when we continue, as we always do, to address this larger issue related to firearms in America and their impact, the deaths that are caused by firearms when the First Amendment permits you to express your views and to articulate those publicly. The Supreme Court now saying the Second Amendment permits you not only to carry and use in your own home a weapon, but also now to go out into public. That's the Bruin case from just last year or so, finding that you do have a constitutional right to carry a weapon in public, again, subject to some regulations around the edges, but not completely. Lots and lots of firearms-related issues to discuss, not only in the wake of the Kyle Rittenhouse prosecution, but all of these other matters and the Supreme Court case coming up for oral argument just this coming week. We are going to turn now to another matter, also much in the public attention just this past week. It comes out of the Alabama Supreme Court. You have seen the headlines. You've read the news about all of this as well. A new front in the legal debate about when human life begins. The Supreme Court there in Alabama says that embryos created and stored in a medical facility have to be considered under the Constitution, under the state's laws governing harmful death as children. The ruling that happened just this past week obviously refocuses attention on issues of privacy rights, reproductive rights. We know well that in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs, an opinion written by Sam Alito, a lot of focus now upon what's going on in state courts, including Alabama, huge amount having to do with what the legislatures around our nation are doing, and indeed referendums as well, in many states as well, determining what, in fact, the scope of the Second Amendment rights are. The Supreme Court in Bruin saying that in order to justify all these kinds of things, that privacy rights no longer are implicit in the Constitution, and that they are matters for disposition by other courts, presumably including Alabama. Now, this is not specifically in Alabama an abortion rights case, but it certainly has tendrils and connections directly back and forth to it, undeniably coming in the wake of the Dobbs decision, finding once again that with respect to reproductive rights, privacy rights under the Constitution, no longer there. The decision in Roe versus Wade way back in 1973, no longer the law of this land. So what did the ruling say? Well, the ruling itself, somewhat narrow, applies to 3 couples who sued the Center for Reproductive Medicine. That's a fertility clinic in Mobile, Alabama, for inadvertently destroying their embryos. The plaintiffs in that case arguing that they were entitled to punitive damages under an 1872 law in Alabama called the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. 2 lower state courts had disagreed with the notion that covers embryos. And they said that embryos were, in fact, neither people nor children. Those are the lower court decisions coming out of Alabama. Gets to the state Supreme Court. They reversed these rulings just this past week, saying that the embryos fall squarely within the Alabama definition of minors, and the negligence lawsuits brought by these plaintiffs could proceed. This is not now a determination that the plaintiffs are entitled to judgment in their favor, but simply that they have reached the threshold, they've gone beyond the threshold to enable them to litigate this further in the state district court. On Wednesday, of course, as you know as well, lots of clinics, including the IVF, the clinic at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, announced that because of the finding that now embryos are people and children who are presumably subject to statutory protection, arguably constitutional protection as well, the IVF clinic at the University of Alabama announced it's pausing fertility treatments to explore the implications of the court's ruling. Many other clinics also doing the same. The significance of that is, of course, that no one knows exactly how broadly this will pass in the nation in Alabama. But freezing embryos, we know, is a fairly widespread practice. And lots of things having to do with standard cycle of in vitro fertilization, hormones, and sperm injected into them with the goal of creating viable embryos for implantation. The process itself, much on the docket of the Supreme Court and of lower courts as well. If the laws now prevent providers in Alabama from freezing embryos, patients may face the medically challenging and, frankly, the financially draining prospect of many more of these cycles of working with the embryos and working with the sperm implantation, all those kinds of things. And a lot of people say that it will disproportionately affect lower-income people, people of color, people in the LGBT community. The ruling may therefore also restrict ways that reproductive medicine is practiced in Alabama. And again, right away, it may, in fact, criminalize or set a very high civil penalty for standard procedures that many of the doctors there do every day. And that's the reason why doctors and clinics around Alabama are now pulling back and no longer offering these services, and determining that maybe the decision by the Alabama Supreme Court prohibits them from engaging this practice at all. Now, the question, of course, is when we think about reproductive rights and reproductive options here, the question, will this go back to the Supreme Court? We know that under the Constitution, yes, there's a mechanism for a highest court in the state of any state to have its decision appealed and reviewed, arguably, by the Supreme Court if it decides to grant certiorari. Unlikely this will happen in this case. Probably a kind of a narrow option for that, principally because the case hinges on the state Supreme Court's interpretation of a state statute. Again, very much related, plainly, to what the Supreme Court said in Dobbs in the past. But nonetheless, a focus on the state Supreme Court and its determination about what the state statute says. The state Supreme Court, again, directed the parties to go back to the lower court to litigate this case, including the suggestion that other legal avenues be explored. The Supreme Court decision, obviously, seeking to establish in many of its language as well some directives, some mechanisms for addressing this issue generally. The Supreme Court holding that the text of the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act is clear, applies to all preborn children, including, again, the plaintiff's embryonic preborn children. The legal status of embryo as human persons now in the part of our national debate. Along the way, in addition to this finding by the Alabama Supreme Court, having these implications for not only privacy rights, but the very identification of when life begins. What is a human being? What does that mean in terms of how we understand life and how the law will respond to that? All those things now back on the table. They've never left. Along the way, we have the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court also writing what's called a concurrence. And along the way, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Parker cites verses from the Bible and Christian theologians in this concurring opinion. Again, he agrees with the result in this case, but he says this. He says, human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God who views the destruction of his image as an affront to himself. As an affront to himself. The concurring opinion, of course, doesn't carry the force of law. This is a concurrence. It's not the judgment in and of itself, but the language that Chief Judge Parker used is significant. He argued in his opinion that the court was merely enforcing the Alabama state constitution, which, according to all the reporting there, amended in 2018 to recognize the sanctity of unborn life. And so he makes reference to that. He also says that the principle has deep roots that reach back to the creation of man in the image of God. He quotes the book of Genesis. And he sprinkles his opinion with a litany of religious sources. Those include Christian theologians, Thomas Aquinas, John Calvin, and others, including the prophet Jeremiah. All of that, a part of the discussion now going forward, coming out of this major decision, coming out of the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama just this past week. We will be discussing that again as the Supreme Court itself, the federal Supreme Court, addresses these issues down the road as well. The debate about privacy rights, about embryos, about when life begins legislatively, in our courts, and in our public discourse continues in our nation. Stay with us. We are back here in our Saturday morning broadcast. We are also especially honored today to have my friends and colleagues in Cable, Wisconsin, in that part of the nation, our nation, and also our state in Hayward. They're at the Birkebeiner cross-country ski race. And yes, there is a connection, as we've always said, between the Birkebeiner historically, this event we described at the start of our first hour, a number of moments ago, involving Prince and then King Haakon, this amazing historical event where the members of the royal guard, if you will, ensured that the young prince was scurried away from the rival tribe and lived to survive, and focusing upon their commitment to their government and the possibility of the rule of law coming forward. And indeed, we also know, here's the other connection with this sporting event happening right now in Cable and Hayward, and that is that King Haakon from Prince Haakon goes on, and he becomes one of the most significant kings in Norway's history. He consolidates his position in 1240. He's obviously an adult at this time. And yes, he focuses on the supremacy of the kingship, but also identifies along the way the things that a leader should do in terms of establishing the rule of law in his country. He initiated, Prince, then King Haakon, a number of legal reforms, which were crucial, really very important for the development of justice in Norway as we know it to this day. His new law, as it was called, written about 1260, a breakthrough, according to all historians, for both the idea and the practice of public justice, this notion that you're accountable to the community and should in fact be viewed through the community and through the public light, as opposed to traditional concepts that occurred in Norway and many other countries, virtually all countries probably, having to do with feuds and revenge, and that's kind of violence as a way of promoting some sense, imperfect, incomplete, and just downright wrong justice. The influence of the reforms that the judges there under King Haakon established could not be overstated. He writes something called the King's Mirror. It's an educational text. It was intended for his son Magnus, and it codifies many of these legal reforms that he put into place when he was the king of Norway that last in many ways to this day into 2024. And I dare say, my friends in cable, that the tradition of King Haakon continues right now where you are in our state, where we have got not only the capacity under our rule of law, under our system of justice, but also to enjoy life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And that's what's going on right now in Cable and Hayward. I'm delighted to be joined once again by my colleagues here in Civic Media, Greg Gunderson and Greg Griesel. Greg and Gray, thanks for being with me once again.
Thank you so much for having us, Jim. Happy to be here broadcasting on behalf of WBZH, the Civic Media Network. And I agree. I can't imagine that Skjervold and Torstein had a recreational skiing event in mind as the eventuality when they rescued the would-be King Haakon, but it is perhaps the perfect expression of what they had hoped for. Of course, they couldn't have imagined he would be codifying a whole system of as much of a philosopher as a king, talking about what rule meant rather than just doing it the way that so many kings and perhaps failures of kings did. He actually thought about the job. Like I said, perhaps a recreational skiing event wasn't what they had in mind, but I think it serves as an excellent expression of exactly what they were hoping for when they made that desperate flight to save that print.
Absolutely. And so we think all the time about the ways in which we build on history, right? Even right here in Wisconsin. I know as well, and Gray, perhaps you can talk to this somewhat as well, that it was based upon that history, that initial saving of the young prince, and again, his work to establish the rule of law there in Norway. That was the inspiration many years ago. I think it was back in the 1970s for the creation of our Birkebeiner here in the state of Wisconsin.
Indeed.
Continued. Go ahead and tell me more about that.
Well, it would have been roughly 1974. There have been pauses, I believe. I might be off by about a year or two on that, but of course, this being the 50th, the math works out quite well. Like Skjervold and Torstein, they had a rather tangible and definitive reason to be skiing the way they skied across the mountains, the snowy mountains of Norway in birch bark leggings. Honestly, as I sit here and think about it, and you take in the area and the type of people, both myself and Greg are from this area near Cable, perhaps, but the type of people who occupy these areas and the type of people who would gather for something like a ski event, frankly, it's the kind of place that any reason to express that sort of camaraderie, togetherness, that sense of community, you look for any excuse you can possibly find to engage in that sort of event and engage in that sort of togetherness. So something as a flight through that sort of forest and this sort of forest that we have here, the fact that it was at all possible to recreate that sort of event is more than enough reason to gather around such a small area with so many people and triple, quadruple, even more than that, the population of the area, just to enjoy that people agree that it's worth celebrating. Absolutely. That gatherings of people, especially in your life, are usually for only the best and the worst of reasons. So something as celebratable, if you will, as this event, it makes a great reason for a town like this, small as it may be, to explode and to become such a positive place to be.
Absolutely. And, speaking of that, again, we celebrate We revel in the sportsmanship. Yes, we revel in the history, you and I think all of our listeners do as well. But there is an economic consequence, right? I believe that both Hayward and Cable, wonderful places, beautiful parts of our state, both under regularly 1,000 people in population, right? Even I think Cable is perhaps even smaller than that. Now we've got descended on this wonderful area, as you said before, you and Greg said before, the people from around the world, not just around their nation coming in. It has a dramatic economic impact as well, correct?
And one could assume that anytime you see a participant on the track, there's likely between 1 and as many as 4 support personnel, not necessarily holding water bottles, and everybody's not bringing their trainer, but children. These are a lot of normal area residents. So when you see one person, that speaks to the presence of 2 to maybe even 5 people or more in the Hayward area. And of course, this makes it the single most important economic event in the cycle of the year, especially in a year like this when there's been no snowmobiling economy to speak of, which snowmobiling economy is really half the months, and for the non-snowy months, it's the ATVs and UTVs. So this event has come at a perfect time. I'm kind of sad to, or a little bit anxious to consider what the economy of the area might have looked like had the Birkebeiner not been possible, which is just another accolade for all of the people who moved and made the snow.
It's definitely huge. It's a on the hotels, all the businesses, and they basically plan for this event months in advance. So if you want to get a motel room up here, you got to call probably around that 6 to 12 months before to get a hotel room up in this area for this event. It's that huge.
To the economic impact specifically, actually, it would be, it's really the make or break. It's actually, Wisconsin just approved applications for disaster relief in counties affected by the weather like we've had this winter because of how drastically affected those economies are by a lack of snow. So that, if anything, is quite indicative of how important it is that snowmobiling and events like the Birkebeiner be possible. We are extraordinarily thankful to all the efforts of everybody involved, the American Birkebeiner Ski Foundation, all of the groomer crew, and everybody else involved. It's impossible for us to know for sure what it would look like without this event, but we're very glad we don't have and what it would have looked like this year without a Birkebeiner.
And generally.
And plainly, for those folks who are thinking about going up next year, 51st is plainly 2025. And you folks, the 2 of you, are going to be back again a little bit later in this hour to tell me more about what you're seeing there in Cable and Hayward, this wonderful event. And we'll look forward to that further discussion, my friends. Come back right after this brief break.
You tell yourself you're not my kind, but you don't even know your mind.
And we are back in our continuing discussion of all things law and government and the aspiration for justice in America. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining Calvin, all of us here on the broadcast stations of Civic Media, including those at WBZH in the Hayward area. We're going to be returning at the end of this hour to my friends and colleagues, Gray and Greg, up to the Birkebeiner for some final thoughts about these connections between justice in America and sporting in America. It is not an attenuated or distant connection. We celebrate life, we celebrate liberty and the pursuit of happiness in the state of Wisconsin and in our nation. We have spoken this morning about a number of very serious issues. We've spoken about firearms in America, this NRA verdict in Manhattan just this past week. The Michigan prosecution, we had a caller about Kyle Rittenhouse. We're also talking just before the break about this major Alabama decision. We have not yet fully digested the impact of that, finding that embryos are in fact people, part of the overall position there by those who would advocate those kinds of things. Plainly, definition of life, all important. Significant, of course, that in that Alabama case, a court concluding that conception can in fact take place in the laboratory. The strongest and presumably most immediate impact of the decision will be on fertility patients, however, trying to get pregnant, not on women seeking to end their pregnancies. So that among the other incongruities, if you will, the consequences of the decision that may or may not be consistent with the advocacies that are out there generally. We also know in the wake of that decision of just this past week that the Attorney General of the state of Alabama has said that the Attorney General's office has no intention of prosecuting providers of in vitro fertilization, IVF, or their families who use frozen embryos that are now considered children. That may provide some solace, some comfort to medical clinics and doctors, others out there. But once again, it raises issues that we have not been thinking about before. All of this, again, in the wake of Dobbs, in the wake of our national debate now about what is life, about what privacy rights are all about, the right of women, and I would offer men as well, to control their bodies and to make decisions premised upon the privacy rights that have been a part of this nation, at least since 1973, actually going back way to 1965, arguably even before that in our Constitution. Supreme Court has also been speaking, as you know well, a lot about academics, and that's our third area for major focus this morning. Some significant issues coming out of the decision last year. This case finding that it is no longer legal, it is no longer constitutional for admissions councils and admission officers to assess race in terms of deciding who's going to be a part of their incoming classes. We know those cases coming out of Harvard and North Carolina. Students for fair admissions, the plaintiffs in those cases, but applying again to private universities and colleges and public alike, and changing the atmosphere, the geography of the way in which our education system works. One of the questions, of course, as we are now in the midst of high school students applying for college, what is the impact of that on their applications? This is the first class that is going to be working in the wake of that all-important decision. We predicted that time that although this decision was important, significant, changing more than a quarter century of tradition and practice in our nation, that maybe in the end it would not have a huge impact, but we're still waiting to see what the incoming class of 2024, the class, if you will, of 2028 when they graduate, perhaps beyond, what that will have, what kind of impact that case will have upon them. Certainly some important notes along the way, some anecdotal support for the notion that students and their counselors are appropriately invoking this determination, this statement by the Supreme Court in June of last year that indeed, while you can't address race overtly, students who are applying can, in fact, submit essays and submit statements that reflect their own experience as people of immutable characteristics, including particular races. And so an awful lot of increasing evidence, anecdotal, that there are students out there taking the Supreme Court at its word, as they should, announcing the law of the land and finding ways in which they will not only present their applications in the strong and affirmative way in which they should be presented, but they will also identify for those officials ways in which we can continue the all-important work of establishing diversity on our college and university campuses. So here's some stories about there. Astrid Delgado first wrote her college application essay about a death in her family. In the wake of the Supreme Court decision, knowing that what they said, she reshaped it around a Spanish book that she read as a way to connect to her Dominican heritage. What a great story that is. Duchesne Curley wanted to leave his indigenous background out of his essay for his applications to college, but he reworked it to focus on an heirloom necklace that reminded him, in his account, of his home on the Navajo reservation. The first draft of Jael Hollingsworth's essay explored her love for chess, appropriate in an essay. The final draft of Ms. Hollingsworth's essay focusing on the prejudice between her Korean and Black American families and the financial hardships that she overcame. All three of those students, again, anecdotally, finding ways, appropriate ways, legal ways, lawful ways, significant ways to ensure that they have access to our nation's colleges and universities. We know as well Sophie Desmoulins, who is Guatemalan, lives in Sedona, Arizona, wrote her college essay with the court's ruling specifically in mind. She said her personal statement explored, among other things, how her indigenous features affected her self-esteem. What a great affirmation that is for all of this. And our experience volunteering with the Mayan people helped her build her confidence and embrace her heritage. That's what it's all about in America. Julia Nguyen, a child of Vietnamese immigrants in Biloxi, Mississippi, rewrote her essay, making her more aware of how her family's upbringing shaped her. She said she felt more proud to have this personal statement because of the affirmative action case. And so some anecdotal support there for the notion that while the law has changed, changing the ways in which officers on our college campuses can address things, students wisely, thoughtfully, appropriately, in an affirmation of who they are, and this focus not only upon diversity on our campuses, but the good and wonderful education that they can, in fact, and should get, should not be deprived of them or to anyone based upon immutable characteristics in those applications. We also know just this past week some additional language coming out of Yale this time, following in the tradition of Dartmouth in February, that the admissions officers there had found that hundreds of students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who had solid scores on the SATs and other entrance exams had declined to submit them because they felt they fell far too below some perfect scores. And Dartmouth now going back in the opposite direction. This past week, Yale University will once again require standardized test scores for admission for students applying to enter in the fall of 2025, becoming again the second Ivy League school to abandon the test optional policies that have been widely embraced during COVID and other situations. The Supreme Court decision last year banning this race-conscious admission, many people, experts, predicted that those test optional policies would become even more widespread. In fact, in an unpredictable turn of events, Yale, Dartmouth, other places, recent research questioning whether these test optional policies may actually hurt the very students they were meant to help. Fascinating events in the era of academics, all in the wake of the Supreme Court decision of just last June. Presumably more universities and colleges looking into these kinds of experiences that Dartmouth and the officials at Yale are now re-embracing, requiring standardized test scores for admission as a way of ensuring, once again, diversity on our college campuses. Lots of things having to do with academics there as we continue our discussion. Delighted, as always, to have callers calling into our Saturday morning broadcast. Joe, delighted to have you with me once again this morning. Your comment, your question, your observation.
Thank you, Jim. I think a fascinating discussion. I would like to see if you had thoughts at all about the world of legacy admissions, particularly to the highly desirable Ivy League colleges and the number of students there who daddy donated, and so they've got an in. I would also like to hear what your reaction is to colleges, and I've heard of this out of Tulane and Stanford. I suspect it's in other schools where if your mother or father is a professor at that campus, you there you go. You got an in to Stanford or Tulane. And I know that there are, for example, professors I know from Tulane that are making the decision to stay in New Orleans, even though things are rocky with climate change there, simply because of what a incredible deal it will be for their sons when their sons are of college age. So would you like to talk a little bit about, when we think about diversity, if your dad donated to the school, why should that give you a leg up? Why don't they just donate out of the goodness of their heart rather than to smooth an entrance for their children? Right. Thanks a lot, Jen. I'd be interested in your reactions.
Absolutely. Always appreciate your comments, your observations. And yes, indeed, let's go back to this decision coming out of the Supreme Court just last year that talked in many ways. They invoked the words of Sandra Day O'Connor, who said way back when they reaffirmed the capacity of school officials to incorporate race into considerations. Sandra Day O'Connor had written, well, maybe 25 years from now, we will no longer be in that situation. Maybe there'll be a circumstance in America where we no longer will have to look at race, a concept that the Chief Justice has sometimes re-articulated in the voting rights area. I think many of us, most of us, presumably not all of us, would recognize that race continues to be a significant issue in our nation, and that, yes, indeed, for the purpose of diversity, all those factors should be considered. Why? Again, lots of invocations here. Brown versus Board of Education says what? Says, I am a better student. The atmosphere is better if indeed I'm in a class, I'm in a study group with someone who doesn't look like me, whose background is different than mine, whose experience economically, socially, politically is different. All that diversity is very, very good. To your point, Joe, when there is a decision that's premised not upon that melting pot, if you will, which is what America is all about, what our universities and colleges should be all about, but it's premised upon a leg up. That is the legacy admissions. We'll focus on those in particular, that I will get into that university or college because I have a member of my family, a mother, father, aunt, uncle, somebody else out there who's already been there. Maybe this donations issue also very significant. That is not consistent, right, with the notion that we're looking for ultimate diversity. And even the decision by the Supreme Court said we're still committed to that fundamental notion, Brown versus Board of Education. It certainly would seem that if one of the considerations, if whether or not you have a relative who has previously attended, whether that relative may or may not have donated for a library or an extension of a building, that sort of thing, that's not one of the immutable characteristics that promote that Brown versus Board of Education broad sense of community and the kind of thing that we would envision for an academic setting that is raucous and it is testing ideas that are controversial and good and offensive and not offensive, all those kinds of things that an academic institution should be all about. All those kinds of things are promoted when you've got people who are there in the class because of the diversity they bring. I would offer, I think, to your good point, Joe, implicit in your question or comment, that legacy is not one of those immutable characteristics. I don't pretend to know all about how provosts and economic advisors and officials on college campuses deal with all those issues. There may be great pressures to do that, but it certainly is, at least seemingly, superficially inconsistent with the Supreme Court's decision, even of just last year. Great comment, great question as we think more about education in America. When we continue with our discussion this morning, we're now going to do a few updates on things we've talked about recently. We know from just this past week, the discussion that we had on the Saturday morning broadcast, that Donald Trump imposed a judgment against him by a judge in Gorin just yesterday, finally entering the formal judgment in the wake of his determination of earlier last week, finding an overall assessment of about $450 million. Significantly, a lot of people looking at the economics of that right now. The amount is going up by $87,502 each day until he pays. We talked last week about the bond option. We talked last week about other things, and also the time is significant here. And we also know from just some reporting this past week, the Letitia James, yes, the same Letitia James who prosecuted the NRA case, is also stating just this past week that she may go after his physical assets there in New York, buildings, other properties, as a way of executing on this judgment. We've got more coming up here on our Saturday morning broadcast, including going back to Hayward and Cable for the Birkebeiner. Stay with us for that additional discussion this morning.
When you get home, Ricky, don't lose that number. Ricky, don't lose that number. Ricky, don't lose that number. It's getting better all the time.
We are back here in our Saturday morning broadcast. Thank you for joining me and my wonderful producer, Calvin. We're here in Waukesha, but we are broadcasting throughout the state of Wisconsin. And as a special feature of our broadcast this Saturday morning, I'm joined by my two colleagues and friends, Gray and Greg, who are there in Cable. And they're reporting to us and providing us with information about this wonderful Birkebeiner cross-country ski race, the largest cross-country ski race in North America. Greg, glad to have you with me once again for yet another report on the significant things going on there, sporting and also affirming the good things that we do here in America. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I suspect there's a good deal of happiness there in your area this morning and throughout the week.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much for having us on today, Jim. And I did want to just shout out a special series of thank yous to Advanced Printing of Hayward, River and Rain Wellness Boutique of Hayward, Lakewoods Cafe of Hayward, and Lakeside Property Management Services of Park Falls, making this broadcast possible, allowing us to be here to talk to you today. And an extra special thank you to the Cable Natural History Museum, who use their space as a media broadcasting area today.
And thank you to you, Jim, for letting us come on your show today.
Delighted to have you both here with me. And again, what a tremendous event this is for the state of Wisconsin. lots of really neat cultural things going on there. We talked already about the diversity of people who are there, all ages, all national origins, races. Skiers from 49 states, the District of Columbia, 20 countries, I believe you told me, and perhaps even more than that. What a great affirmation of who we are.
It's incredible that this event is even going on this year. Last year at this time, we had 100 inches of snow on the ground, and this year, as no Mother Nature hasn't been kind to us with the they've actually manufactured a beautiful loop track here right in Cable here at the Telemark, right at the trailhead there. That has been just wonderful. And now today's tradition is usually the big ski from the trailhead from Telemark, Cable, Wisconsin, all the way to Hayward, Wisconsin, which is about a 34 miles. So, but we'll be on the loop track there, and there's still a lot of events going on. Isn't that right, Greg?
Throughout the day, yes, indeed. And I mentioned the 2018 American Olympic gold medalist from the 2018 Winter Olympics will be participating today. Jesse Diggins will be on the track, making it look easy here up here in Cable.
So I want to ask the two of you, as you're there throughout the day. I'm jealous. I suspect many of our listeners are as well. You are plainly broadcasting, as you said, from this wonderful facility that's hosting us today. Are you out there? Are you participating in the events yourselves?
Oh, certainly not. There may have been a time in my life when such a thing would have been possible, but I was not interested in that sort of athletics, and I'm not.
I was kind of inspired, but that was way back in my younger years. I'm in my high 50s now, so I figured, well. But although you see skiers of all ages out there.
Very true.
You see some people that are 75 years old all the way down to probably, 14, 15
Younger
years
than
old.
that, even 8 or 9. But suffice to say, while we wouldn't stand out on necessarily confident enough in that fact to test our theories.
Very good. And again, Greg, never, ever too old to be out there sporting, and a very young person you are. And we'll look forward maybe in 2024. We'll do this again next year again. I'm delighted to have you with me on this broadcast. Let's make plans to do this again, and I'm going to expect that the two of you will get your equipment there and be out there, maybe doing some live remotes. Calvin, others there will be able to put this together in such a way that we can actually hear you as you're participating. How's that for an aspiration for next year?
That would be a lot of fun.
If I've got to put this equipment on and ski with it, I'm going to bring you with me. So you bet we'll be on your show next year if that's happening.
That's great. Gentlemen, any further comments as we conclude your wonderful reporting and coverage there from Cable?
I think we've done quite well enough today for what we had planned. I think you've done fantastically to allow us to broadcast to your fantastic listenership about what's happening here in Cable and in Hayward, Wisconsin today. I would just ask that anybody who sounds like interested in participating or attending the event, quite frankly, with how much skiing is taking place, if you're within a Civic Media listening range right now, you could probably make your way to Hayward today and get here before the skiing is finished. So if you're curious, make your way on up to Hayward, make a weekend trek of it. It would be a great time for anybody to occur on, or to happen upon the city of Hayward, town of Hayward, this weekend.
These events start at 7 in the morning, go all day, and it's great to see how excited the winners are when they're up on the podium there and announcing the awards and stuff. So a great event. Come on out. They got streamlined parking. They can bus you right up to the site. So it's a great setup and great part of the American Birkebeiner cross country ski race.
There you go. Not too far to travel. I know when I've been up in that part of our wonderful state before, I think it's about 5.5 hours or so from where we are, kind of in southeastern Wisconsin. It is doable. So get up there to see not only Gray and Greg, but all the other wonderful people there, part of the Birkebeiner. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me this morning. Looking forward to being in touch with you before next year at this time, but certainly next year we'll do this once again.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's been a pleasure to be here at the Cable Birkebeiner media space and on your show this morning. Thank you so much for having us.
Likewise.
Take care, gentlemen. Have a good day. And in our final minutes, again, consistent with our theme this morning of the ways in which we participate in life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness here, we're also going to talk again about a couple more things, just some updates in our remaining minutes here. What's going on in the courts of America? We're still waiting. We're still waiting for the United States Supreme Court to tell us what it's going to do with this application by Donald Trump, presently running for the presidency of the United States of America. He has requested, actually 14 days ago this coming Monday, 2 weeks now, pending before the Supreme Court, his review of the decision that finds that he is not immune from prosecution, decisions made by the lower courts, the D.C. Court of Appeals, the District Court as well. That decision is not a difficult one. My own assessment is that the longer this takes, two things happen. One is it's probably worse news for Donald Trump, because what it means is that there probably is some discussion going on inside the Supreme Court. Maybe they're going to be writing concurrences denying his application, and that's what's going on. But it does take more time. And as we've said previously, every day that passes is a day before Tanya Chutkan can reschedule this matter and get this case tried. Again, the major theme of 2024, timing, tick-tock. And so we're still waiting for that decision. Supreme Court, again, going to be entertaining some oral arguments this coming week, as I said before, on the bump stock issue. Many more cases, 9 more oral arguments coming up in March. Got about 60 cases pending before it right now. And we also know that in the coming week or so, other attention is going to be focused upon the other case, the other federal case. That's the one pending in Florida, being presided over by Judge Eileen Cannon. She's got a couple of things in front of her that are not yet before the Court of Appeals, having to do with the names of witnesses, having to do with secret government filings. She's going to be having a hearing this coming week to determine what is going to be happening there, including a trial date there as well. Next week, we're going to be talking more about some of our international issues that we prefaced today: Brazil, Pakistan, Germany, and yes, indeed, England. Come back next week for that discussion about those international rule of law issues, including, as we did today, references to Norway, history, and the aspiration for justice across our planet. Thanks for joining me this morning, everybody.